I mean, obviously I went in at 14, but yeah, I really didn't know what I was doing, but I know the people used to do the thing called the milk round where they go to schools and tell people what being a surveyor was. But the only thing they did at that time was teach you what a quantity surveyor was. And I found that to be, I have to be honest, thought that was quite boring doing, what they call brick counting. Well, there's a lot more to it than that now, but that's what it was always called. I think it needs to be exciting. It needs to be seen as exciting. Otherwise, it's all that'll happen is that the engineers and architects and other accountants will steal our space if we're not careful.
Welcome to the Surveyor Hub podcast, the podcast for surveyors who just love what they do. I'm Marion Ellis, and in today's episode, I chat with Bill Jones, a chartered surveyor, originally from the Wirral, but now residing in Singapore for the last 16 years. Aside from the day job, Bill has been an active mentor and counsellor for many years, helping people towards their RICS goals. And I got to know Bill over the past couple of years from our time on the RICS Governing Council. Welcome to the podcast, Bill.
Thank you very much, Marion. Great to be here.
And I feel like this podcast is going to be one of those ones where we just chat about everything.
Yes, when we get together, we chat about everything. So it will be one of those.
So hopefully we won't get too distracted about whatever. But for those who don't know you, could you introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Bill Jones, full name William, but yeah, everyone calls me Bill. Originally from the Wirral. That's my original sort of home. I moved to Singapore 17 years ago when I was working for Shell. And I've been here pretty much ever since that time, really. Brought the family out and settled here on a permanent basis. So a bit about me. I'm a chartered surveyor. Came into the world of surveying at a very young age, the age of 14, working for my uncle, who was a retired valuation building surveyor, mixture of both. And basically studied under him, doing all sorts, holding tape measures and stuff like that, and doing all those type of things. And just got the bug for it. Just fell in love with what was originally doing residential surveys and valuations. Simple as that. Great stuff. Loved it. And just decided I wanted to be a chartered surveyor. So been a chartered surveyor since the age of 23. So I qualified. So here you go. That's a bit about me. Got family.
There's so many questions there, Bill. The first is that for many years I thought you were a QS, which I knew you did. I knew you'd done lots of different things, and we know each other because we were on governing council together. As we record this, you're still on the current RICS governing council, and that's how we've got to know. I don't think our paths would have crossed otherwise.
I don't think they have done, really. We were connected on LinkedIn, but where it was really through the RICS.
Oh, that doesn't count, really, does it?
We didn't meet. No, we didn't actually meet in person until the end of 2019. But that's how we got to know each other.
And for those listening, you may or may not know, I record these on Zoom because I find it a lot easier to see who I'm speaking to. And the problem with Bill is that in my head, he is Paul McCartney.
Aha, Paul McCartney.
Because because you've just got the accent, and in my head, that's what I just do. So I don't know if that's flattering or offensive, depending on which side of the fence you're on. But I always think of you as Paul McCartney. Let's chat about your career then, because you started at 14. I wonder if that's the earliest, youngest surveyor journey, but in the Wirral. So, what really got you hooked? You said you got the bug. What was it?
Well, it was just looking for something to do. I mean, I was sort of 14, wanted to earn some money, basically. Simple as that. It was wanting to just go and watch the Liverpool Football Club, across the water, the other side of the water. So it was, I'm born on the Wirral, but my family are from the Liverpool side, my parents, grandparents. So watching Liverpool. So it was just to earn money to do things like that, which you couldn't really do coming from just quite an ordinary background. Need to earn a bit of cash, so didn't know what to do. So my uncle said, well, you can come with me and you can, hard graft, go out and tape measure damp meters. So that's how I got into it, just doing all that stuff. Remember the first day I did it, though, it was pretty embarrassing. We went to a house somewhere. I think it was actually somewhere in North Wales. Connors came or Flint area, and it was a terraced house, an oldish terraced house, and didn't know how to use a damp meter, and I was like terrified, and just stick it in the wall. So I did, and a chunk of the plaster came off because it was damp, and I pulled it out. Not that hard, so because immediately I was on what to do. Lots of apologies to the owner, but it was things like that, going up in lofts and going on the floors, actually just being out. I didn't want to do a job where I was just stuck in an office all day. And I knew, although I love football, I would never be a professional footballer. You know, you used to realize that. And although in the family who had musicians, people who could, you know, sing and make music, knew I'd never be a musician. I could never sing to that level of competency. So I thought, well, I'll give it a go, you know.
So
that's
so you're not
really the eyes that carried on earning pocket money.
So you're really not Paul McCartney.
Well, funnily enough, my mum used to go and see the Beatles, and she knew them, so she knew them pretty well.
I think everyone's got a tenuous link to the. Everyone's got a tenuous link to the Beatles. I think a lot of surveyors will remember that first day or that first property that you go to, and it is really nerve-wracking, and you can't really prepare for it. You're going on someone else's territory, so to speak, and you're going in a professional capacity, whatever age you are or however you start. And I think, and you know, as soon as you said that about putting the moisture meter into the wall and pulling it out, I remember doing exactly the same with a wall that was basically made of sand. And the lady was watching me, and I remember saying, "What did you do?" And I said, "More's the worry. If the rest of this house is built like that, will it still be standing?" And I felt bad about that afterwards because she was probably terrified. But you know, these things happen. Were you quite academic at school? How did you get your qualifications to be, or get qualified as a surveyor? What route?
I think I pretty much scraped through. I just, because I spent a lot of time, you know, I used to like to, not what I call an extrovert, but I used to have lots of friends, used to like to get out and about, and wasn't bookish. So I just did always enough to get through. So that was basically me. So I did usual thing. I think I got maths and English. I got the basic O level for those, and I did languages. I did languages. I did Russian and French to A level and things like that. And I also did Latin as well, which was just because I had an interest in linguistics. So that's what I just did those and managed to get good scores in O levels and A levels. But it was always with a view to doing that. And I must admit that school was sort of saying, well, you could do something else. You know, you've got good results in A levels. And I said, no, my aim was always just to get enough. And I know that people were going to things like Reading or Heriot Watt. And I just wanted, because I then had a Liverpool season ticket, I didn't want to travel very far. So, and that was quite strange now, considering I've, you know, as I say, my dad used to work in all sorts of far-flung places, and he would always travel. And I suppose because of that, I used to think, well, you know, is it a good thing? Because we never see him. You never saw much of him when I was a kid. So I always thought, right, I'll be a home bird. You know, I'm quite happy to stay at home and just do that. Obviously, the travel bug got me a few years later, but
I think that's really...
But at that time, it was, you know, being on home territory was great for me, and being able to have my social circle unbroken was even better. Yeah,
I think that's in part a generational thing, and I say that because I was that myself. I went to a local institute, as was then. It's now a university. It never occurred to me to leave Wales, and I did apply, I think, to Reading, and I was a bit poorly, so I had to delay my my degree. And then life just takes over as it does. And I think there's a lot to be said for studying local, you know, that reassurance, the costs and all of those things. But we don't always think about what's possible. And, you know, I've always seen myself as quite sheltered, and only in the last few years thinking more globally. And I think being on governing council has helped me certainly with that. But you had an understanding of what it meant to travel around the world if your parents were. So, or your dad was. So where was your first job then? Your proper job?
First job after I left the College of Bricks, as it was called, the Liverpool Polytechnic, which is now LJMU. It was a great course, we had great lecturers and everything else. So I worked in Chester for a couple of years after that. I did my my cadet training at Cheshire County Council. So I didn't want to go back and work for my uncle. I could have done, but I said, no, I want to just try something different. And that when I started to get more into the sort of wider sort of general practice, as it was called then, doing sort of commercial and other property inspections and property sales and getting properties ready for disposal, because they had huge estates. So you're looking at anything and everything. There was really good grounding, and the people there were fantastic. Had a big team long before the days of outsourcing.
Yeah, I hear that quite a lot. We've had a few people as guests on the podcast, and they started out working for a local authority. I mean, how local can you get? But it's a really good grounding for the training that you need, and I don't know, maybe it's a bit of stability, I guess. Not necessarily jobs for life anymore, but a lot of people find that as a really good stepping stone. And so, what was your role there? You morphed into more sort of general practice, you mentioned, or was it anything specific that you did?
Well, I was there for 2 years, just when I got my RSCS, and it was basically, what I was doing was it was being inspections. So they'd have all these various houses. A lot of people like in the fire service or would have houses, police service. They also had these huge agricultural holdings, so I had to manage those as well, which was always quite a sort of, it's amazing how culturally it changes, because the head of the rural estate, this I won't mention his name, but I think he's still alive. He's long retired now, but first week we had an appointment. His secretary came and she said to me, right, you've got to go and see him at a certain time. It was 9 o'clock prompt on the Wednesday morning. So I just walked straight into his room. He had this big, big office. And of course, I didn't knock to go in, and I called him by his first name. So immediately he just went into a rage, and I had to call him Mr. Flanagan, and set me out to knock on the door. So I had to go out and knock on the door, and it was, come in, and that kind of thing. So it's all very, that's just a different world now.
Thank goodness it is.
Well, yeah, exactly. That was also awful. Just in terms of your own personal morale, but you just had to get on there. But it was not nice, that kind of thing, because it was always, you never learned anything from those people. Not everybody was like that. I worked with some fantastic people who taught me so much in that 2 years. It's, and it's funny, one of them went on to be a work colleague, 2 of them actually, when I worked for Shell later on. At the same level, I was part of the same team. It was funny, then they were both higher than my bosses and became, really, really good friends. And life evolves, you never burn your bridges with people, even with those horrible people like Mr. Flanagan, Never burn your bridges with them, because you may at some point come back and deal with them. Challenge them, they're horrible.
Yeah, I don't know. It's difficult, because we shouldn't have to tolerate some of the things that we put up with, and it's finding that balance. But nobody should have to. In this day and age, I think we've got a generational shift of culture. Nobody should have to put up with those things. But you're right in terms of, the people that you get to know that you might later work with. And, they might be your boss, or you might be their boss. And I think something that I come across certainly is, surveyors don't get that training as such on how to be an employee, how business works, how to communicate with people. We talk about on the job training, but there's something to be said for understanding, the rules and the unwritten rules, if you like. And I think it's quite hard, even now, for students, trainees, those just starting out, to understand how to pitch things and whether we say the wrong thing, what's appropriate or not. It's all about testing the boundaries at every stage, isn't it, of what's acceptable. And now, as we record this, we've come out of a 2.5-year global pandemic, depending on where you are in the world. And that's added another layer of complexity, hasn't it? Because there's lots of people who haven't had the mentoring, haven't had the interaction. It's quite interesting, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, I think so. I think, when I first started, I got that grounding, but other people didn't get that level of grounding, where they didn't get taught how to speak to somebody when they knocked on the door, how to speak to somebody on the phone, how to write a letter, all that kind of thing, I was lucky to get that. Others didn't, and they just had to learn on the job, which by mistakes almost, which is not a good way to do it. You need somebody to coach you. And it's always, that's why now I'd always try and sort of pass on, if people want to learn stuff from me, then happy to pass on, even if it's just one little tiny thing. because it can just help people make that difference in their careers, just that tiny little thing. And that's important. So it's really a duty to do that, I think. As chartered surveyors, I think we have that duty to do it within our profession.
I think you're right. And it's not just about the technical things that we're sharing, but also, and it sounds really, teaching someone how to send an email, teaching someone how to answer the phone. But if you've never done it before, and I remember the first day on my graduate scheme that I did with Lang many years ago, I'd worked for a few years before, was sort of more mature than the others. And on day one, they were literally terrified about answering the phone. And I was just thinking, how the hell am I going to survive 18 months if everyone else is worrying about how to answer the phone? Obviously, other things that I needed to learn, but, and it's not about doing things all proper, but it's knowing how to communicate with people, getting a sense of when things are right or wrong, lots of things that can be learned. And we can be so abrupt. And I'm like that. I'm very abrupt on emails. I'm just not thinking properly. I have to take time to say, hi, and in my head I've said it, but I just haven't written it down. Let me ask you about moving to Shell then, because that must have been a bit of a culture change, would it, from local authority to an organisation like that?
It was. I did it after I left Cheshire. I did a few years in private practice. And then I moved back into government because there was just opportunities. I mean, I worked for Merseyside Police Authority and the National Crime Squad. And what we were doing there was property development. So we were selling off the older stock and getting funding to build new design and build projects. So that was an opportunity just to move into something completely different. So moving on from the sort of managing the corporate real estate in a local authority to actually doing some project development, property development and project management. I remember the architects hated the idea of these chartered surveyors coming in managing projects, because they all thought, back in 30 years or 25, 30 years ago, it should all be done by architects, could not be done, or engineers, could not be done by a chartered surveyor. But I think we have that good skill set to be able to do that. So that in turn led me to Shell, because they were trying to do some things that were different. Instead of just managing Shell's corporate real estate, they had some challenges, which meant they had to do different things. So it was a big change for me, having to adapt to working in a sort of private corporate world in a big organization like Shell. It was a big,
Did you have to retrain then? Because I come across lots of surveyors who, there might be a QS, they want to move into residential or, move into different types of surveying. And just because you're qualified or a member of the RISS doesn't mean you're good enough to do the job. And so a lot of people don't take the leap because they think they need to have to retrain or they don't have to start again. And how did you find the transition then or did it feel sort of more natural, the next thing?
I think having done that sort of property, the development side, I don't
I guess, Yeah.
And then also I'd done some work in local authorities, some of the early days of finding sustainable solutions for some problem estates in the north of England, where we sort of try and think of holistic solutions, and also looking at things like, energy management systems. So we got involved in some of that. So that was a big help to me within Shell, because none of the other people really had those skills, but they were used to managing, in a big organization like Shell. The adjustments really were cultural. A lot of the surveyors who worked for Shell at that time were double barrel surname folks, and they were slightly different to the kind of people I'd worked alongside. Some of them were a bit aloof, which was a challenge in itself, having to really challenge me to try and sort of build relationships with these people, which I did in the end. Health and safety culture was the biggest shock, because, holding handrails and having to follow rules. Even in the early days of mobile phones, people would use them walking downstairs, which you couldn't do. Very strict rules at refineries, wearing PPE, things like that, which in the local authority I worked for, and also worked for Merseyside Police Authority, it was never really, even like women working alone, that was never thought about. It was always thought about as being, it's not important. Just get on with the job. But Shell took that very seriously. So, first 6 months, I would say, was a steep learning curve in terms of this big organization and having to do things a bit more quickly, having to meet deadlines, having to follow really strict processes and health and safety training. I mean, that was quite intense. You couldn't start work in a refinery or go and do any work on a refinery unless you had that training and passed those examinations. And we did DuPont training, which was very, very strict as well. You know, it was the stage where you want to carry anything above a certain weight, you had to put on a trolley. Whereas most of us would carry it. No, you had to put it in a trolley and get things signed off, you know, scaffolding, having scab tags, all this sort of thing. Yeah, very, very strict rules. So, yeah, it was, but once I've done that learning, it was a fantastic place to work. So I enjoyed my 10 years there. Yeah, it was just,
and is that where you started to travel, or was that still in the UK?
Yeah. Yeah, I remember my interview. There's a guy called Mike Barker, who was then the global head of real estate, and he was fantastic, Mike. He was, in those days, it was all chartered surveyors. Very different now. A lot of them are just Cornet. That's their sort of go-to sort of body, and it's mostly networking. But you had to be a chartered surveyor to get a job in Shell in those days. Very strict. I remember Mike in the interview saying, "What? Yeah, would you be prepared to travel?" And he said, "So what happened if tomorrow I said to you, right, we need to send you to South America to go and sort of look at a piece of land and come back and tell us how we can dispose of this surplus land or building asset we have in Chile or Argentina?" And I said, "Well, no, I absolutely have no problem with that." I talked to the family about it and said, "Yeah, we're up for the challenge." And I said, in my job within the National Crime Squad, the furthest I got was Carlisle, something, or London, And so, and whilst that was a big adventure to travel to Carlisle or London for a couple of days on a project, the idea of going to Chile or Argentina was just something, unheard of. But yeah, within a couple of years, within 18 months, I was traveling to Europe. And then within, let's say, 3 years, I sort of started traveling to Singapore and Malaysia, and then, Philippines, Thailand, and then they offered me the chance to move out here permanently, and that's how it came about. Yeah, for 2 years, they said 2 years. I'm still here, so something happened along the way.
So how did that?
I forgot about that. Left me here.
How did that work with family then? Sort of moving family around. That must, because we talk about doing our jobs, but there are consequences, aren't there, of either not being with our families or...
Yeah. I mean, see relatives pass away, and, like my dad and grandma pass away and not being able to be there when it happened. So you do miss things like that. And for my children, it was an upheaval to go to school, especially my daughter. Initially a huge upheaval, but it did help in the sense that she's dyslexic, and also she's dyspraxic. So she's sort of the clumsiness thing, as well as having that trouble with their learning at school. So she couldn't do sports very well, and she couldn't read or write very well and learn things. So the UK didn't help her. The system didn't help her, whereas in Singapore, she got loads of help. Obviously, Shell paid for us when we all went to the international schools, so you're paying for it. Mm-hmm. And so the UK, where it was the state system. But they did. It was tough for them at first, the kids, and also the climate, the humidity really impacted them. They come home from school and just practically fall asleep, because the humidity would just get to you. So, yeah, it was a big upheaval. So, and I say family issues as well. My wife's dad passed away. Literally, we arrived, straight away, so he couldn't get back. Things like that do impact you. So you have to think about that, think about the consequences, and make sure you have a good employer who will help you to, when needed, to go back at short notice. Mm-hmm. And I think there's more flexibility in big organizations now than was when I joined, because I had the bosses were not all that, in Shell, were not all that flexible, were not flexible at all. That's probably what led me to move on, really. They sort of found that there was, there were certain people in the organization. You can be in a fantastic organization, but if you've got a horrible boss, you sometimes have to move on, unfortunately.
And that can be anywhere, can't it? Yeah.
Yeah, I thought Shell was still a fantastic organization, doing some great stuff, trying to move into renewable energies and really, and in terms of diversity inclusion, it was just seamless. Even 12, 15 years ago, it was just part of your DNA. Had to be. That was a different thing I had to learn. It was part of the DNA of Shell, and it was fantastic, and still is a fantastic organization. But a horrible boss makes you move on, and people need to think about that in the world. There's so many people who, probably the majority of people move on, not because of the organisation, but it's because you get a manager who just doesn't know how to manage, doesn't know how to mentor or
and
keep people.
I think you're right. And I think that comes back to that, learning how to answer the phone and doing the office basics. It's then learning how to be a manager. Recently, and that's where this goes out a couple of months after we recorded it, but recently I popped a post on LinkedIn because a surveyor reached out to me. She's working all sorts of hours. She's tried to talk to her boss about it, and it's just, no, you do this. You just, and what's evident is he clearly doesn't know how to manage. She's struggling, but I also feel for that manager because they don't know any different. And I wonder, in some areas, some types of companies, there's almost a generational thing of, well, I only know how to manage people this way, which is to crack the whip, make them work harder, set rules, and they get on with it. They perform or they don't, and they can be successful at that. But now we have a much more, I guess, becoming a much more accepting society. We talk about diversity and accessibility in lots of different ways.
Yeah.
And even if you haven't got those challenges, there's still things like juggling childcare, and that's a parental issue, not just a female or maternal issue. And we've got to be looking at that. And so sometimes you do wonder, is that hierarchy model still relevant? Because we're all trying to fit into it, and most of us don't. We leave and we move. When actually, does it need to be a different model? I don't know.
Well, I think
my thoughts. But we'll get there in our lifetime. But
no, I think that management, the toolkit, which somebody once said to me, when I was with the police authority, my boss was a guy called Sir David Henshaw, and he always talked about having a toolkit. You've got so many different skill sets as a manager. Sometimes you do need to crack the whip, but most of the time you have to employ so many different skill sets and for different people, there's different ways that they will react to things. So you need to have so many skill sets as a manager. You can't just do it. Say, this is my. And he used to say to people, if I was interviewing somebody to be, to come in at a management level, and I said to them, "What's your style?" And they just said one word in back. He would just say, "No, I don't want them. I want something to say, I don't have a style. I have a number of different styles and different approaches to how I manage it. I have a whole range." That's what he wanted to hear. And I think that's a really good way of approaching it, because over the years, I've managed people of so many different, nationalities and age groups, the whole range, and people with different sort of family backgrounds, different, family challenges. You just got to treat everybody differently, understand where they sit in terms of their career plan, family, and everything else, and get the best out of them. At the end of the day, that's the reason you employ people, is not just to give them the best opportunity, but it's to make sure that you can get results as well. It's all about that two-way process. So,
and I guess the thing is to be consistently different. I guess in that you tuned in to and know the people that work for you and with you, so that you can be more sensitive when you need to, or supportive in a tough love kind of way. But I do think that, for a lot of surveyors out there starting their careers, or whatever stage they're at, they'll be thinking, I just want to be a surveyor and do a job. And they don't get involved in the management side. They don't become aware of it. And I talk to a lot of people about being in the business of surveying. A surveyor is in the business of surveying. It's not just inspecting a building, doing a report or whatever. You've got to be aware and have context of everything else that's around you. And having that managerial toolkit, even if you're not managing people, is so important, because you're managing projects or progressing things through or whatever it is, or making tough decisions, delivering bad news sometimes. So having that toolkit, I think, is absolutely vital. And I'm sure, as you said, you've seen that on an international level with different cultures and those things. That must have been a lot to learn. And I'm also to get a sense that sometimes the world can seem so small because we're connected. We can travel anywhere we want, usually. but it is so big and vast at the same time, that there really are oceans between them. Can I ask you about, you mentioned at Shell, you had to be a chartered surveyor to work in certain departments or certain companies. And that has evolved over the years. And we see that. And I guess that sort of brings in the question of, are surveyors relevant? Now here,
good question.
There's a tough one. Now here in the UK, I know those that do valuation work, it is relevant. It is essential. You have to be a registered RICS valuer to do that kind of work. But I think for the rest of surveyors in lots of different guises, it's a good to have, nice to have, not necessarily an essential.
Yeah.
Do you see that as change? And is that similar across the world that you've seen?
Certainly, you're right on the UK picture. Outside the UK, I've seen it's an interesting one in terms of the sort of particularly corporate real estate, which is where I spent a lot of my career. See, a lot of people now, like Shell, will put in a job advert that they want people. See on LinkedIn, they say a Cornet qualification like MCR or one of these Cornet qualifications is what they're looking for. They don't necessarily go for RICS anymore, which is. I think it's a shame because I think that wider skill set, Cornet, a lot of it's about networking, and that's really important. And that's dropped off across the Asia Pacific region. It's dropped off within RICS. We don't do enough networking. I mean, we used to, and it's dropped off, and that needs to come back to really counterbalance that. And that's where Cornet's got a big advantage. They've got the networking side. It's important to grow people's social and interaction skills with clients, stakeholders, peers. But also the learning side, and they've come up with the learning. But there's I think that's an area in RICS does need to can step into that ground again, which is lost to some degree. Not through anyone's fault, but just through a series of circumstances, it's lost a bit of that. Outside the UK, certainly need to make it relevant again. You do need to start thinking about a qualification because people like to get that. Over the years around Asia Pacific region, I've seen so many people who really come to me and said, I'm just so grateful I've got that now. That qualification is so important to me personally. So I think it does have that personal value still. But people then to get on their careers, that personal value isn't enough to get them a job. So they need to get some kind of qualification that's recognized. Not necessarily a degree, but it could be, certain types of learning programs. And Cornets have got some of that because they've got like this QCR, so it's a qualification, which isn't a long-term thing. It can take you 6 months or 12 months to get. So we need some of those things like diplomas or a whole mixed bag of things that we can use. And as I say, that sort of networking side is important as well, because I believe young people coming through now don't just want the qualification. They want something where they can network with their peers and with stakeholders, potential employers, that kind of thing as well. So that's what I think will make a qualification relevant in the future. It's having that mixed bag of things, not just having letters after your name. You've got to have that sort of wider sort of platform. So, I think it still is relevant, but it's lost a bit of relevance, or lost quite a bit of relevance there. 10 years.
RICS has had an interesting couple of years,
True.
for lots of different reasons. But I think it's always had a challenge of being, a standards and regulation body and, the membership side of what that means to people. It's like, I'm in charge, but I'm your friend as well. And that can always be, really a really difficult mix. And, I hear a lot of surveyors talk about, RICS doesn't do enough to explain what we do and the relevance and promote to industry and the profession to industry. And there is an argument to that, absolutely. But I also believe that surveyors need to talk more about what they do, how they do it, why they do it, what they love about it, so that people can just get a better understanding of what surveyors are about. And the challenge is
good point.
Absolutely bloody different.
Oh, yeah.
We're such a mixed bag. And so, but for me, it comes back to that whole purpose of keeping people safe, helping them live their lives in the form of structure. Even if you're doing valuation, we've all have a part to it. And so,
Absolutely.
maybe, and I get the qualification part, because we do need to be qualified, but there are others out there who do it better, do it, in a different relevant way. And you're always going to be on the back foot, whatever membership body you're part of. But I think there's a big piece there of helping people understand what surveyors are about better. And we can do a lot of that ourselves.
I think we need to do that. I mean, it's funny that years ago when obviously I went in at 14, but yeah, I really didn't know what I was doing, but I know the people used to do the thing called the milk round where they go to schools and tell people what being a surveyor was. But the only thing they did last time was to teach you what a quantity surveyor was. And I found that to be, I have to be honest, thought that was quite boring doing, what they call brick counting. Well, there's a lot more to it than that now, but that's what it was always called. I think it needs to be exciting. It needs to be seen as exciting. Otherwise, it's all that'll happen is that the engineers and architects and accountants will steal our space if we're not careful. Whereas surveying, it is a skill set in its own, really, because it's and I think that people don't perhaps appreciate that. So we do need to sell it better. We need to actually start to produce materials.
We could all play a part in that, and yeah, we need to make it exciting.
That's a list of things. Yeah,
that's a really hard thing to
council agenda.
That's a really hard thing to fix. I remember going into a school a couple of years ago, and there was 3 of us, and I think the kids must have been about 12, 13, something like that. I went in as a resi valuer. Effectively, I just talked to them about being a bit of an estate agent was the easiest way to explain a lot of it. There was another guy there who ran a carpet shop. He did quite well. He's quite charismatic, said he fits carpets. This is the money I've got, and this is my van. And there was this guy who worked for Aston Martin, the car place, and he worked in the prototype department. And he described how he'd be in this room and it had lots of lights, and they would get the car right and it was all flat. So there was no bumps whatsoever. And the kids were like, wow. And they literally he had them in the palm of his hand until he said, but you can't take your mobile phones in there. It's all top secret. And they were like, what? And so it's really hard to engage. But I think the more that you can, just demonstrate that you're passionate about what you do, that just generates that curiosity, doesn't it? And it just plants that seed for, future years to come as to what people end up doing. But I do think we've all got a part to play. Can I ask you about the work that you do now? So you're based over in Singapore.
Yes, that's right. So I came over to do corporate real estate work in Singapore with Shell, managing all of its corporate real estate. Simple as that.
And can you explain to me, what corporate real estate is to a resi valuer who doesn't know?
Well, yeah, I know the workplace is changing, but we still have workplaces. All of Shell's employees work somewhere. Some of them work from home. Some work from offices. Some of them work in refineries. Some of them work in filling stations. Some of them have in distribution. So they all go and fill up a tanker with petrol and take it to the filling stations from a refinery or from a distribution center. Some of them will take them to airports where there'll be aviation facilities where Shell will store fuel. Some of them will put them into pipelines. There's pipelines all over the world where the product will go into a pipeline and get transported somewhere else. Some of them, there's chemical plants where they will actually break down the product into, say, things like plastics. We make plastics out of the product that is brought up from way below the ground and taken to refineries. All these different things require a building or a piece of land to happen on. Apart from, say, those people who are fortunate enough now to work from home, get that balance. So you got, say, offices, refineries, everything else. So the role of me as a corporate real estate professional is a corporate real estate chartered surveyor is to actually support the business. So to actually say to the business, what do you need? So, do you need more land for your refinery? Which at Shell, we needed to buy a bit more land to expand so that we could build more facilities at the refineries. We needed, in some cases, to provide houses for the senior people, buy the houses, whatever, for the CEOs and people like that. Offices, make sure I have the right offices, the right workstations, carpets, all that type of things over an office. And manage the offices. Retail, you make sure that you manage the retail facilities properly, because you have oil storage, petrol storage. You have inside, you've got the all the things that you sell, anything from coffee to petrol to magazines, all that kind of thing, the supply of all that. So you get involved in any aspect of that to make sure that it all works smoothly and make sure that it makes money for Shell. So yeah, that's what a corporate real estate professional does. They'll get involved in anything and everything.
Absolutely. I hadn't realised how broad it was, actually. I mean, I did, but I didn't. You know, how broad. And so I can see, therefore, how it gives you a lot of flexibility to take on different roles. You know,
yeah, it's different.
Career progresses and different industry sectors, I guess.
Yeah, things like you can be a project manager. You can do PMO, where you're managing the overall programs. You can be involved in doing transactions, lease management. So you can be in charge of the database, make sure that all the payments go in and out through your whatever systems you use for payments within your organization. There's also things like inspections, so inspecting property. And I say the whole range of stuff, really. Anything you can think of to do with property, you have to go and do it, and somebody has to do it, and you outsource it, but you still have to manage the outsource provider. So, like JLL, for example, do loads of stuff for organizations like Shell or ExxonMobil or Standard Chartered Bank or whatever. But there needs to be an in-house team to manage that, and that's what I did for many years in my with Shell and with Rio Tinto as the in-house real estate person.
And we talked about the training that you might have as a manager as your career progresses. I guess what's important then is you're alive to not just ticking off your CPD, but making sure your training and your competency is relevant because of these different things. And you're not, spread too thin, but you've got enough, you can outsource it, but you've still got to have a responsibility. And that's the thing that I see quite a few surveyors actually is, we talk about, are we qualified enough to do the job? And we don't always test our competency as we go through, because I've been a chartered surveyor for 200 years or whatever it is. So you don't test it, but we don't intentionally plan the next step, the next thing that we need to learn. We just sometimes pick CPD because that looks interesting, or I have to do it because the regulations changed. So I guess it's important to have a really proactive approach to where your career is going.
Yeah, I would be broad. I mean, even like procurement was a skill I never really had. I mean, I'd left that to the procurement in Shell were always a necessary evil. They've seen you've got to use them, but they are difficult, inflexible people, blah blah. But then I worked for Rio Tinto, and I actually was worked in their real estate was in their commercial department, or the commercial part of the organization, I should say. And that's what happened in mining, that the real estate sat within commercial, which is effectively procurement, sourcing, commercial contracting. And therefore I learned a huge amount about procurement, which was, definitely a skill set I'd never thought I'd be able to develop, but I did. And I think that's important that chartered surveyors get to understand sourcing. Things like doing RFPs. I'd never, suddenly I was having
RFP is request for proposal, is it?
Proposal, yeah, an RFI, so I refresh for it. So you're sourcing, you're outsourcing, say, all of your transactions, all of your lease transactions to the market. You're going to go out to, say, a JLL, CBRE, Knight Frank, or whoever, or even a local firm. You might be doing it in the country, or you may be doing it for just a one-off project, or globally. So I've done all of those different things. And if you need to do evaluation, you need to manage conflicts of interest. You need to manage, the scoring. You need to sort of manage the interview processes with the procurement people. And they know how to manage the processes, but they're not real estate professionals. So you have to work closely with them. And it's something I'd never really done before. In Shell, we tried to work closely, but we were never seen as being important to the senior management. Whereas now, I think it's absolutely critical that surveyors do need to understand about procurement and sourcing so that they can work, come up with better outcomes for their clients or for the organizations they work for. That's just one thing. I mean, health and safety is another where, you need to learn about that. And sustainability is another big area. I think chartered surveyors need to learn much more about that. I mean, managing projects where you say, like building a net zero the zero carbon structure, that kind of thing. You've got to learn all about at least enough about the technical requirements to be able to do your job effectively. And that's a big gap I see.
Yeah, I think for some, if you're a bit longer in the tooth, that can feel quite scary to learn.
Oh yeah,
it's
scary. Yeah, sleepless nights. Yeah, I've had those sleepless nights, and I'll never learn enough. But yeah, it's the older you get, the scarier it is, I think. Yeah, but it's exciting at the same time because there's so much great things you can learn about. How to treat rainwater and how you can manage that more effectively, and the use of these sort of building integrated solar panels to where you can actually build them into the structure such that they can form part of your building structure and provide additional power for your building or the complex you work in, and try to achieve a net zero. So whatever energy you consume in managing your business is actually something that you produce yourself. So you've got that sort of zero in the equation, which is a huge thing. But years ago, I thought, how can you do that? But there are ways to do it. But surveyors don't know enough about that. And they need to get that.
Technology has moved on, since, and we're always out.
Yeah.
Let's face it. Yeah. I think, you mentioned safety, which is health and safety, which is so important. And again, we might do a risk assessment as we're whizzing around our house doing a survey, but when it's on a much bigger scale and you're dealing with bigger projects, there's a worry that you might get things wrong. But I see this as a common thread with surveyors that I work with or coach or come across in different capacities. And it's that fear of failure, that fear of getting things wrong, either because they might get sued or, the real consequences, sometimes life or death, depending on what kind of project you're working on. Have there been times where you've really felt that fear, or and how have you got through that?
Goodness me, I've had some incidents over the years. I must admit, the first time it ever really struck me was I suppose that time of Susie Lamplugh. That was the first time it really struck me, because we was the time I worked for a company, and I remember just in the same week, there was one of my peers in the organisation. She went to do, she used to do with residential lettings in the practice. I worked in private practice in those days, in the sort of mid to late 80s. And she, went to see someone. This guy propositioned her, and she stood up to him. But she said, she's a very assertive person, but she said, if you sent somebody else who wasn't as assertive, it could have got quite nasty. And she didn't have a mobile phone in those. Nobody had them. And I remember a couple of years later, I had a huge row with my boss when I worked in government in the early 90s, when one of the ladies in my team, she had her own mobile phone, but he wouldn't buy them for the office. Actually, no, it wasn't. It was late 90s. It was when I worked for the police authority, and we wouldn't sanction phones. Everyone else was buying, getting phones and using them, but she had her own. Luckily, she had her own because it was a situation developed on site. And luckily, because she had the phone, she could ring the office and get somebody to help her. And we also rang the police, and she was okay. I mean, it was just verbal altercation, but it could have got really nasty. And the boss we said, well, that's her problem. Not. I said, it's not. It's your problem, because we have, and there's no such thing as risk assessments. There's only one who joined Shell that really understood how to do, how you assess risk and how you manage risk. That's what really taught me how to really manage that kind of risks. And Shell was really hot on that kind of stuff, and always be grateful for that experience. But, since then, I remember when I was working with Shell, we had a couple of nasty situations where we were managing big estates where you'd go out and you'd be literally walking across, pieces of land, and you'd encounter things like we had unauthorized travelers on land, for example, on Shell land. That could get very, very nasty, that kind of situation where you'd have to try and manage it. But even Shell, was not perfect in how they exposed you to that kind of situation.
And the thing is, we look at health and safety or doing these assessments in terms of what does it say on paper, the size of things, the risk of certain things happening. But we're also dealing with human beings, and we are unpredictable as much as the human beings that might be tenants or on land or whatever.
Yeah.
And that's always hard. And we just don't take into account of that. And I think people look at surveyors or engineers or whatever as, we're like robots, very robotic and technical in our work, but we're also humans at the end of the day. And so things like, and I noticed this when I dealt with claims, was that if somebody wasn't having a good day or they had something going on, they were more likely to make a mistake. When you're tired, you're more likely to be clumsy and to hurt yourself. And so our well-being, our physical, mental and emotional well-being is absolutely critical to our health and safety and the health and safety of others. And yet we don't really factor that in, not properly. And we, you talked about in the early days knocking on that chap's door, and, I can imagine you were pretty nervous, and, all the feelings bundle of feelings that come with that. And if we don't people or help people feel secure and supported, then we just become an emotional bag of worries, if you like. And that doesn't help us do our jobs properly or better or learn well either. So it's we talk about well-being, like we should just have a green smoothie and have some sleep and go for a run. But it's so much more about that and more than that. And I think given that we're dealing with the places that people live and work, it has for me, it's much more, we need to pay more attention to it, We
do. Yeah. People don't speak out, especially, I think, especially in this part of the world, people don't automatically speak out about their problems at work. And once you can't force them to. I think there's ways in which you can try and find out more about people's challenges they have at home. I mean, for example, the pandemic, a lot of employers wanted their workforce to come back, but some of them, in Singapore or Hong Kong, live in very small apartments where there's 4 generations of the family. And if you've got that situation, trying to work in an environment where you've got that 4 generations can be almost impossible, really, without, but they got through it. How people's resilience is just fantastic. But at the same time, the well-being thing, is just as important as personal safety. So it's to me, it's just as important now, and it's raised up, and it's one area where people used to leave employers because of it and wouldn't say so. And they actually could say it was a horrible boss, but in fact, it was a boss that didn't tune into their own personal needs and just didn't, take those into full consideration and just said, "Is this just get on with it?" kind of thing. It's was the mentality which has been a global problem, I think, and we've readdressed it now with the COVID world, but we still need to constantly think about it, and not just managers but peers as well have a duty to raise it with in team meetings or with managers to alert them to problems. And that's where trust comes in. You've got to build a trust in order for peers to share their information with a manager and say, somebody's got a problem here. You need, as a manager, to build that trust with people where they can share that.
And there's, all of these things, don't happen without consequence. It shapes and changes. Yeah. And I guess really, just as we've talked there, it's just made me think actually about, the RICS, and I said, it's a standard and regulation body. How could it be your friend as well? But actually, that whole well-being piece and who we are is so important to the work we do that there is a loop there. It's just finding that right combination. And we've got to look after each other. I know we saw this particularly in the Surveyor Hub and some of the other networks I'm in, that surveyors did reach out to support each other. And you don't have to be a full-on mentor. Sometimes it is just that check-in, are you okay? And here's something I've learned. And that feeling of connection is so human. Bill, it's been lovely to talk to you today. Really good. Thank you ever so much for joining me. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to take a look at the show notes when you get a chance for the resources and links we mention in the podcast. The Love Surveying podcast is not sponsored, so I'd really appreciate it if you could show your support by sharing the podcast with others, leaving a review, or simply buying us a coffee. Find out more about becoming a Surveyor Hub supporter by visiting lovesurveying.com/the Surveyor Hub. I'll see you next time.